Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating and honestly massive critique from a recent source that paints a very specific picture of the future. We're talking specifically about June 12th, 2026. The source outlines a scenario where Elon Musk allegedly becomes the world's first trillionaire, and they use this premise to break down a really complex web of inflated market valuations, tax evasion strategies, and alleged political favoritism. We're going to impartially map out exactly what this creator argues and how they claim this gigantic fortune is actually built. To kick things off, we really have to grapple with the incomprehensible scale of $1 trillion. The source uses this brilliant time analogy that just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. If you count back 1 million seconds, you go back about 11 and a half days. Not too hard to grasp, right? But what if you count back 1 trillion seconds? You're actually traveling back 31,000 years into the past, literally to a time before human civilization even began. That is the sheer, mind-boggling magnitude of the wealth we're talking about today.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. The $1 trillion illusion, selling castles in the air, buy, borrow, and die, the political symbiosis, and building real wealth.
Section 1, the $1 trillion illusion. The reality of paper wealth. So to really understand this hypothetical trillionaire status, we've got to look at Musk's massive corporate stakes. We're talking about a 38% share in SpaceX and up to 25% in Tesla. But here is the big catch: paper wealth. The source points out that Musk holds only about 0.1% of his wealth in liquid cash. The rest, it's entirely tied up in company shares. If he actually tried to sell a massive chunk of those shares to get cash, well, he'd flood the market, trigger total investor panic, and crash the value. So according to the creator, this immense fortune is largely just an illusion on a screen. Section 2, selling castles in the air. Valuations versus fundamentals. Now, you might be wondering, if this wealth is all tied up in company shares, are they actually worth trillions based on real performance? Well, the source claims that in 2025, despite reaching a towering $2 trillion valuation, SpaceX actually lost $5 billion. And this brilliantly illustrates two completely contrasting financial concepts. You have the firm foundation theory, which says value is based on actual fundamentals, like revenue and profit. And on the flip side, the castles in the air theory argues that value is based entirely on psychological hype. He alleges that Musk is basically a master of the latter, driving up these inflated market valuations by selling grand visions instead of solid corporate stability. To back this up, the source actually maps out a timeline of what they call unfulfilled promises. They point to the 2013 Hyperloop concept, which was ultimately wound down. Then there's the 2014 promise of putting humans on Mars within a decade, the 2015 claim that fully autonomous driving was right around the corner, and the 2019 prediction of 1 million robo-taxis on the road by the next year. Harvard Business School professor Mihir Desai is quoted by the source describing this whole phenomenon as a financial cult, where people are investing purely in Musk's name rather than realistic product timelines. The creator sums up this entire dynamic by highlighting a pretty harsh critique from Steve Eisman. You might know him as the famous investor who predicted the 2008 economic crash. When talking about this massive valuation, Eisman stated, "This is an IPO of a sci-fi story, tailor-made for a sci-fi cult." The source uses this to really hammer home their argument that speculative hype, rather than solid financial footing, is what generates this extreme wealth. Section 3. Buy, borrow, and die. The tax evasion loophole. So if this wealth is all on paper, how do billionaires actually pay for their luxurious lifestyles, right? Well, the source breaks down a strategy the ultra-wealthy allegedly use to evade taxes, widely known as buy, borrow, die. Here's how it works. Step 1, buy. You buy and hold your shares, never actually selling them, which means you never trigger income tax. Step 2, borrow. You borrow against those shares. The creator details how Musk allegedly mortgaged 236 million Tesla shares to secure a $12.5 billion low-interest bank loan to buy Twitter, completely tax-free. Finally, step 3, die. You pass that unsold stock to your heirs, utilizing rules that basically avoid capital gains taxes on inherited wealth. So the crucial point is the staggering disparity this creates. To put it into perspective, while the average American taxpayer is paying roughly 20 to 30% in income tax, the creator reports that between 2014 and 2018, Elon Musk's wealth grew by nearly $14 billion, yet he paid an effective tax rate of just 3.2%. It's a wildly different reality. When you're looking at these massive loopholes and the sheer scale of this untaxed paper wealth, you really have to genuinely wonder, how does an empire built on these kinds of strategies survive strict government regulatory scrutiny?
Section 4. The political symbiosis. Shielding the empire.
The source makes some heavy allegations here, arguing that this wealth surge actually relies heavily on political favoritism. Specifically, they point to a massive $290 million campaign donation, resulting in an alleged symbiotic, almost shadow president relationship with Donald Trump. They list several specific regulatory favors allegedly granted as a direct result. For instance, they claim 40 pending legal investigations were suddenly dropped, and national security conditions were removed to fast-track Starlink in India, right after a high-level meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Now, what's really interesting is how this allegedly impacts public financial safety. The source claims that right before the SpaceX IPO, the SEC suddenly dropped a rule that required brokers to keep customer money in safe, separate accounts. Because of this exception, the creator argues that $70 billion of public retirement and pension funds were funneled directly into this highly speculative IPO just to inflate the valuation, basically putting everyday citizens' retirements at massive risk. Furthermore, the source highlights an alleged decision by the Federal Communications Commission. They claim that an FCC chairman appointed by Trump granted Starlink control over a staggering 2/3, that's 66%, of all low Earth orbit satellites. The creator argues this essentially hands a global monopoly of space infrastructure over to one private individual, completely prioritizing Musk's empire far above standard regulations or fair market competition. Section 5. Building real wealth. Practical skills versus financial cults.
Having laid out this pretty massive critique, the source shifts gears to talk about the real-world cost of all this. They cite the United Nations World Food Program, which estimated that $40 billion could eliminate world hunger by 2030. Now remember, that is a tiny fraction of a $1 trillion net worth. The source notes that when presented with a $6.6 billion roadmap to save 42 million people from starvation, Musk completely ignored it. They argue that society is the one bearing the brunt when astronomical wealth is hoarded like this, rather than utilized for global fundamentals. Ultimately, the creator concludes their analysis with some very practical advice for all of us. They warn against pouring your own resources into speculative hype and financial cults. Instead, they urge investing in undeniable fundamentals. And honestly, even more importantly, they advocate for investing in yourself. They suggest focusing on practical skill building, specifically highlighting the immense value of learning to develop tools with artificial intelligence as a true crash-proof asset for your own future. It's a fascinating analysis that really challenges how we view modern fortunes, isn't it? It leaves us with a huge question. Are you investing your time and resources in reality, building tangible skills and strong fundamentals? Or are you simply following a financial cult based on sci-fi promises? It's a massive thing to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay focused, and I'll catch you next time.